Delaina with the Georgian Bay Biosphere, and today we're going to talk about container gardening. This is something we get asked about all the time at the Georgian Bay Biosphere. How do I do this successfully? What are the tips and the tricks that will make my container gardens better? Well, we're going to go over some of the key suggestions today, the key considerations, and we've got a few bonus tips as well that will help you have more successful container gardens at home. There are many advantages to using container gardens to grow your fruits, veggies, and herbs at home. You'll have a lot of control over how much sun they receive based on where you put them and where you move them to. You'll have more control over how much water they receive based on how often you water them. You'll also have less soil-borne disease that you'll likely have to deal with because you're only going to fill the containers with good quality potting soil. You'll basically eliminate the need to do any weeding of your container gardens. And they can also be used to control things that like to spread. So for instance, mint and oregano, even strawberries, can be a little aggressive in the garden. Container garden kind of holds that problem together. So the first thing to talk about when we talk about container gardening is, of course, the container itself. Just about any type of container can be used to grow herbs, fruits, veggies. You can use barrels, you can use other pots, you can use tubs, you can use pallets. You can really get creative with it. Check out yard sales. As a general rule though, the larger the container, the better. Not only are these going to hold more water, but they're going to allow more space for the plants to grow its roots, which is generally preferable for most plants, especially things that like to grow a little bit taller or a little bit bigger. Now, that's still to say that we can't use smaller containers, but you're just going to want to maybe only put one or two things into a smaller container. Whatever container you use, the most important thing to remember is that they need drainage. If there's no drainage holes on the bottom of the container, the water will simply pool at the bottom and it will cause root rot no matter what plant you have in there. So if you choose a container that doesn't already have drainage holes, you can simply drill or puncture a few holes in the bottom of it. 1 centimeter is lots, and then maybe just a couple depending on the size of your container. Now, if you're worried about the soil falling through those holes, you can line the bottom with a piece of landscape fabric. If you don't have landscape fabric, you can just use something as simple as a coffee filter. Now, if you're bringing your containers inside at all, or maybe you just want to be cautious, you don't want them actually sitting on the deck. Remember, water is coming out. You might not want that water sitting in one spot on a wood surface, say. You can also put a tray underneath it. I highly recommend using these. These are the bottoms and the tops of the sandwich platters or the veggie trays that you get at grocery stores. And either the top or the bottom will work perfect. Just keep that water off of any surface you don't want damaged. Another option, I've actually got this big one propped up on an old clementine box. I use it to give it some lift so that the water can still run out of this barrel, but it doesn't get held against my deck. Next thing to think about when you've got your container is the soil that you're going to put in it. You only want to use good quality potting soil. Don't shovel sand or soil from the ground and use it in your container. Potting soil is actually specially designed to hold water, to hold nutrients, and to be light enough that it doesn't compact around the roots and stunt the plant's growth. So only good quality potting soil in your containers. And of course, we can't really talk about soil without talking about food. Just like any garden, in container gardening, to feed your plants, you have to feed the soil. Now, in a container garden, any plant is going to need more nutrients than what is actually available in the pot. If you buy a container garden that's already made for you from a nursery or a garden center or something like that, there's usually a slow-release fertilizer in the soil. And what that's going to do is just slowly feed your plants throughout the growing season, so you're covered. If you're like me and you put together your own container gardens, chances are your potting soil doesn't have any fertilizer in it, so it's something that you're going to have to think about and create for that plant through the growing season. There's a number of different options for fertilizers for container gardens at almost any plant nursery or store that sells, gardening goods. So always try to choose something that's a little more environmentally friendly, organic if you can, and be sure to stay away from synthetic fertilizers. If you want to go one step further, you can actually try to make your own fertilizer. It's called compost tea, and essentially you soak some leaves or grass clippings or compost in some water in a bucket for a couple of days, and then use that, the water, strain it, and use it to feed your plants. It will also water them at the same time. Now, the next thing to think about is sunlight. Where do you want to put your container garden? Do you want to put it on your deck, your patio, a balcony, a driveway, a backyard? How much sun does that area receive? If you receive maybe 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, you can start to grow some really heat-loving plants, like tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, basil also really loves the heat. If you get less than that, maybe on the low end, 3 to 4 hours of sunlight a day, that's when you want to start planting your lettuces, your Swiss chard, your spinach. Things like that don't need quite as much sunlight or heat to thrive. Now, based on how much sunlight your container garden is going to receive and on what plant you've decided to put in that container, it's going to tell us how often we need to water these containers. Most likely it will be almost every day, if not every day. Smaller containers that are in a lot of sun, you're definitely going to have to water them every day. Now, a good way to check is to just use your finger to check the top 2 inches, about 5 centimeters of soil. If that top layer is dry, then it's definitely time to water. And when you do water, be sure you do so thoroughly. And by that, I mean you want to see puddles form on the top of your container, or you want to see some water coming out of those drainage holes. Sometimes the container, the potting soil can get really dry and kind of crack together. So when that happens, the water tends to just run down the sides and it actually doesn't get into the core of the soil and water your roots. So that's something you want to watch for when you are watering your plants. If you keep them well watered all the time, that's less likely to happen. And now the best part of container gardening, the actual plants themselves. When you know how much sunlight your container is going to receive, and you've started to think about what type of plant you want to put into it, you can start to check out seed packages or seedlings at nurseries and pick some different varieties to grow. Now, you want to not overcrowd your pots. That's really important. So I recommend even taking some pictures of the pots and bringing them to the nursery to help you remember how big they are, how many you have. You can talk to somebody there about what combinations might be good. When you're thinking about combinations, maybe you want to put 2 different varieties of plant in the same pot together if it's a little bit larger. Be sure that you put things that need the same things. So you wouldn't want to put a lettuce, which doesn't need a lot of sun, with a tomato, which does. You also want to make sure that your plants generally get along. And you can do this by looking at something called the companion planting chart. There's tons of resources online about companion planting, and it basically tells you which plants actually get along with each other. So although beans and beets, tomatoes and cabbage, and peas and onions could all be planted in containers, those pairs, those combinations, actually for various reasons don't get along and shouldn't be planted together. You might choose to start seeds in your container gardens and grow plants that way. That's a great option, and you can directly sow the seeds right in the containers if you would like. Now, you might instead prefer to use seedlings. These are some that I've purchased. These are little lettuces. And the way that we would plant these in the container is the exact same way that we would for any other garden. You soak them to make sure they're good and wet. That will allow the soil to stick to the roots and allow them to be less disturbed as you pull them out. You wrap your fingers around them so you've got a good hold on them, and then give them a bit of a push, a bit of a squeeze, and you'll see that they just slide right out and your hands will be there to catch them. Now, after that, you want to tickle the bottom a little bit, just stir up, shake up the roots, just slightly. We call it tickling the roots. And that's going to tell the plant that, it's time to grow again. It stimulates a little bit of growth from the bottom of the root area. After that, you can put it in your planter, just dig a little hole, put it in. You want to pack the soil around it firmly, but not too tightly. You don't want to squish or scrunch your roots, but you do want them to be able to make contact with the new soil that you've planted them in. After that, give it again a good watering until you see water come out the drainage holes, And there you go, you've planted your containers. Once your container gardens are in good shape, your seeds have germinated and started to grow, or your seedlings have been successfully transferred, our job isn't actually done. You want to keep a good eye on them, and in addition to watering them very frequently, check for any dead or dying stems and be sure to remove those to help prevent disease and mold. Some plants, like tomatoes, will actually benefit from being pinched off, where you pinch off some of the leaves as they develop. And what that does is it directs the plant's energy into growing more fruit instead of more leaves. A common mistake that many gardeners make, and I too am guilty of it, is admiring our produce for too long. When you get these little cherry tomatoes or these perfect little eggplants coming on your plant, you tend to like the look of them and you might just want to leave them there because they're so pretty. But your produce will spoil pretty quickly, so be sure that you're eating it frequently as it develops. And this is true for herbs too. Definitely make a point of using your herbs as they grow. Now, our number one top tip for container gardening, like all gardening, is to never give up. If something doesn't do very well, it doesn't mean that you have a brown thumb. If you start to see brown leaves or dead or dying parts on your plant, simply pinch them off and see if the plant will put out new growth. If it doesn't, and maybe you do have some plants that don't make it, you can simply remove them. If it's mid or early season, you still have lots of time. You can put another seedling in that container and try again. And take a bit of time to research what went wrong. I guarantee you someone else out there has had the exact same problem and has a solution to offer. Was it too much sun? Not enough water? See what you can find and make adjustments for next time. Thank you for listening to our video on container gardening. I hope it's been a help. You can find more information about gardening at gbbr.ca/gardens. Best of luck with your containers and happy gardening!